All right, here we go. All right, my name is Michael Sakamoto. I'm from UL Solutions. And maybe this is a little bit of a different topic. It's not technical, but it's talking about standards. And I probably did something very similar 2-3 years ago in a presentation just to try to educate, get people up to speed on some of the standards. And maybe a little bit of background of sort of the logistics of how some of these things work. So I thought maybe I'd take the 10 minutes or 15 minutes and really just talk about that a little bit. There are going to be a few slides in here with text from a standard, and you're going, what the, but don't worry about those. I'm not even going to go through those. I'm just going to wing through those just as an example. All right? So first things, one of the standards that is really involved in data centers from an IT equipment side is the 62368-1. It's an IEC standard, and it is a recognized, harmonized, internationally recognized harmonized standard. And it covers a lot of the information and communication technology equipment today that exists in the data center. One of the things it does, and it's uniquely using as a platform, is a hazard-based safety engineering platform. And what that means, in simplistic terms, is it looks at all the hazards and risks in the system. So it looks at electrical shock, electrical fire, looks at thermal, mechanical, radiation, and hazardous substances. So these are the 6 elements they look at, and they say, what is the extent of that hazard? And for access to that hazard, what's the extent of that, and who is actually involved in access of that hazard? And then it defines what safeguards you need to mitigate that risk or hazard. So in that sort of idea, what it does is it allows the technologies to emerge and continue to develop and grow, and the standard somehow has the flexibility to grow with that technology curve. Now, standards usually are always behind the technology curve, and I think most people know that. That's because it goes through a committee, and it goes through a commenting period and a voting period, and sometimes it goes through a year or two just to get some things going. And I'll touch base on that again later in the presentation. The other thing of this IEC 62368 is, like I mentioned earlier, it's harmonized internationally and adopted and recognized by most of the major regions in the world. And what typically a region may do, so let's say IEC 62368 publishes a standard, the United States will take that and say, all right, we're going to adopt that standard, but we also need to add some national differences. And those national differences are typically the electrical code, because those are required for the region that it operates in. So Canada's got the CSA version of that. There's different Europe has their own version of the 62368, and they take the base document, and what they do is add their national differences that really adopts to the regional electrical codes that actually exist. So that's kind of what happens with these standards. The other thing is just, the harmonized framework, what they call future proofing. This hazard-based safety provides a lot of that. So I think one of the things that we are at OCB looking at is how do we make sure that what we do in the immersion effort is properly implemented in this standard so that everybody can go out and be able to use this and not only test but certify products to this standard. So this is sort of the challenge we have. I'm not painting this rosy picture that everything's great right now. One of the things that I want to present is the fact that we got a lot of work to do in this area still. And there are some things that are going on that are good, but there's still a lot more work to be done. I'm going to kind of talk, this next 2-3 slides are just text right out of the standard, right? So I'm not going to go through these, but it just talks about safeguards and should be not breaking down due to over voltages, and a lot of general terms, requirements, and then some cases it may go a little more detailed in terms of referring to another standard for thermal classifications, but then all of a sudden it pops in and says, the immersed equipment should be 60 days allowed for electrical test. These kind of things will get popped in. The issue with a lot of these requirements, they were put together some time ago and has never been updated. So at that point when these things came out, there wasn't a lot of equipment out in the market today, and there weren't a lot of manufacturers that were producing immersion equipment, not even the tanks, the systems, or the installed equipment. But nothing's really have changed yet, and here's some more. In terms of, you need to have a pressure relief valve. You need to conduct a hydrostatic pressure test, and so there are some still good elements in here, but it may be a little off, or it may be not as comprehensive as it needs to be. And some of the main ones that we started to tackle at OCP are things like auto ignition temperature, flashpoint. How good is this? Is this the right test method? Is the temperature a good temperature for today's technology, not something that was written years ago? So those are kind of things that we're looking at right now. Now, 62368 just published their 4th edition. Just recently, I think the IEC was published about a year ago, and the UL version just got published a few months ago. So, but if you look at the immersion area in what the standard calls the immersion technology area, they call it the insulating liquids. That's the name and terminology they use in the standard. And the 4th edition got published, and there's no change at all. There's nothing was changed in that standard. While they did a lot of additions and tweaks to the liquid-filled component section, right, the direct chip cooling stuff, the immersion never changed. So one of the things we have done, and then the last thing I thought on the requirements, there are a lot of good parts in the standard that has reference to an authorities having jurisdiction or a permitting authority, right, code officials. They want to see markings. They want to see instructional safeguard instructions that are at the facility for operators to follow. A lot of these things in the standard are very good to have, and we want to make sure that these stay, but also they should be refined or updated as necessary. So here's some of the issues. There's significant gaps, I believe, and I think in some of the OCP community members that have been looking at the standards feel that there are some significant gaps in the current standard and what it requires for immersion and what the current technology is doing. And just to give you a reference, the current requirements were put together in 2019. And as you know, if you think what was happening in immersion in 2019, it was just starting to incubate, right? It's just starting as an idea, concept. A few players started to jump in. So that's how outdated this thing could be. So that's kind of my key point is that's the starting point where we are today. So we got a lot of work to be done. Now, some of the things that have already been brought up, flashpoint concerns. Are we talking about the right flashpoint? Do we have the proper auto ignition temperatures? Are some of the material compatibility issues, should they be in a safety standard? Right? Maybe there isn't enough in it right now. Are there other things we should look at? The other thing for 62368 looks at a fully configured system. Are the systems being sold that way today? Probably not. The tanks are being sold to somebody and then the operator puts in their own servers, right? So some of these things are just not commercially applicable in a way that's feasible in what's going on in the market today. So all these things need to be looked at. And so, I am part of the liaison team right now and trying to help out. How can we proceed in trying to see if we can impact a better version of the requirements in the standard? So while we're doing this, UL has also published a number of standards. UL 2417 was just published, and that's an outline of investigation for the fluids. And a lot of that refers back to this 62368 document requirements. And it pulls from that and say, hey, if you want to certify a fluid, there is a standard that you can certify to. We're also, UL is also looking at 2 more other standards that are being drafted. One is a system standard, where it could consider an unconfigured tank so that a tank manufacturer can certify and get it out to the market without having to have an idea of what needs to be installed before they even ship the product. The other thing is they're looking at also an installed equipment standard. So it could be servers, storage equipment, power equipment, whatever that needs to be immersed. They're also looking to put something like that together. So once some of these things are fleshed out and have better concept of where it's going, we do intend to come to OCP and say, hey, here's some of the ideas that UL has in terms of some of these outlines. The other thing, terminology, you'll see outline of investigation. This means that it's a certification requirement standard, but it has not been it has not gone through any consensus process with the industry. So UL owns the standard. That means that if UL publishes a standard and the industry goes, you need to change this and you need to change that, those changes could be made very quickly because it doesn't need to go to a comment period. It doesn't need to go through any voting. we can just make the change on the fly and get that republished. So that's a mechanism that UL is looking to use moving forward to see if that could help the industry in facilitating some requirements towards certification that can move a lot quicker. Because as you know, standards take years and years and years to go. So a couple things we've done. OCP is now set up formally as a liaison to the TC108. TC108 is a committee, technical committee, that manages and develops and shapes the standard of IEC 62368. So OCP as an entity has a voice directly to TC108 now. So we should take advantage of that. And that's one of the things through Amy Short's requirements group and the liaison group. We're putting that all together and see if we can come up with some material, even if it's the 2 or 3 things we need to change, and get that to the TC108 so we can make this changes start to happen in the standard. And most of you already know that ASTM has already started to work together with OCP, and so that's another good thing. So, so the liaison team will continue to be very active, and I intend to participate, but we also want many of you that are interested in the standards and talking to the standard development groups or the code officials. NFPA is another big one in any of the code officials, because in data center, code officials are extremely important in permitting equipments to be turned on, right? So you want to actually have codes that actually may influence that. So just a call to action, we want people to get more involved and help us put together a more updated requirements for not only 62368, but all the ASTM standards. And now we have ASHRAE. All these things are starting to come together. So if you have interest in that, please step up. I think you got a lot of the QR codes and the contacts that you can make. And if you can't find anybody, feel free to contact me and we'll get you set up. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. Yes. Oh, questions. Any questions? I love it. All right, we're good.
Michael,
Oh.
over here.
Oh, yeah.
On behalf of the Immersion project, you have been active with us for so many years by now, and I just want to say thank you so much for all that help you're providing from a UL perspective. This is one of the more critical elements that we need to get alignment on, so thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.